In 1995, we had two first-person shooters which made quite an impression on people. On one side, we had Doom, which put more emphasis on horror, more realistic-looking environments, and had a somewhat dark tone. On the flip side, we had Rise of the Triad, which didn't attempt to make sense, whose levels were full of dastardly contraptions and traps, featured power-ups like mushrooms that made you hallucinate, and finally, it even allowed you to gib people by barking at them as an invincible dog. Unfortunately, Rise of the Triad didn't last long against Doom due to outdated technology, forgettable level design, and finally, Doom's huge popularity. Now skip ahead to 2013, as Interceptor Entertainment is more than ready to bring back Rise of the Triad to today's gaming audience with this modern remake. But don't worry, modern remake doesn't mean that RoTT now has cover, regenerating health, and all of today's shooter hallmarks. If anything, the best way to describe this game is Rise of the Triad meets Duke Nukem 3D with the Unreal Engine. The action is blazingly fast, even when you play with the slower characters, firefights are deadly, and you'll be fending off attacks from all fronts. You can jump and crouch whenever you want. You have infinite ammo in all of your guns and have a mighty arsenal of missile weapons lying everywhere for you to use. You can rocket jump. There never is a dull moment in this game. Rise of the Triad brings us 4 episodes, each of them are comprised of 5 levels that have been taken from the original game. They've all received huge facelift, as they now look good and are no longer restrained by the Wolfenstein 3D engine, which definitely allows the designers to be far more creative with the level design. And as you'll play, you will recognize some portion of the level design from the 1995 games. But many of the hazards you'll have to overcome will be brand new, far more involving, diversified, and outright crazy. Levels in this game do a much better job of sticking out from each other, as they all feel like distinct entities, unlike the 1995 game where most levels just ended up looking and playing the same. You explore a variety of places such as war forts, gardens, castles, and underground caves filled with lava. They all look really good, and some of these levels will feature bewildering sights like these.
Wow, 我飞得很高。
The other portion of the game which got a huge facelift is the music. The soundtrack of the original game was one of the game's stronger points, and the developers of the remake were fully aware of this. They've taken the entire soundtrack from the original game and recorded heavy metal versions of them, making your journey through this game even more over the top and badass. If for some reason the new soundtrack doesn't suit you, you can toggle an option to make the soundtrack from the original game play instead, which also has a very nice touch. If you played the original Rise of the Triad, you know what to expect gameplay-wise. Your bullet weapons have infinite ammo and therefore are essentially your resource solution when it comes to fighting. You'll mainly use the various missile weapons of the game in order to fend off the Triads. All of the original weapons were brought back and revamped. You still have the trusty bazooka, which now has a sight headed to it, the Heat Seeker that now has a missile cam, the firebomb, which is undoubtedly the best weapon of the game, as you can now guide the projectile to explode underground at command, and the flame wall, which can also act as a rapid-fire flamethrower, in addition to throwing huge curtains of fire at your enemies, just to name a few. Enemies behave the same way that you'd expect from an old-school shooter. They're not very smart, but their numbers make them quite a threat. The whole roster of enemies from Rise of the Triad is back, although they are more involving to fight. Lightning guards can now steal your weapons in a flash, strike team will roll out of the way of your missiles and bullet more successfully, and many of the enemies can fake their deaths and surprise you when you least expect it. Also, enemies are no longer the bullet sponges they once were, so fighting them is no longer annoying. Even the monks are pleasant to fight now, since they go down rather quickly. They also happen to be way deadlier, as death monks now float toward you faster and suck your life from a longer distance. Being swarmed by them is now a death sentence. The dead fire monks are also way more brutal, as they shoot slow fireballs that home toward you. As an added enemy, we get the Uber Patrol, an enemy soldier that are jack of all trades. Being attacked by machine gun wielding soldiers that roll away from your attacks and steal your weapons is deadly. The most welcome aspect of Rise of the Triad is its sense of humor. The original was already well versed in that aspect with its wacky feature list, but the remake ups the ante in a few ways. It openly mocks modern shooter conventions by giving you superfluous mission briefings that don't really debrief you on anything.
A mission briefing? Seriously? You need a mission briefing? Alright. If it moves, kill it.
By giving you a reload button, despite your guns having unlimited ammo and clip size, which really fit well with the old game's approach of, why is this feature here? Why not? You still get to cook food with explosives, which never gets old, and there are mini-boss encounters where the boss has the dumbest and most childish name you can think of. There's even some humor as you die, as a disembodied radio voice just calls you out on your failure.
Medic! Medic!
Hey, you're not doing so hot. Maybe it's time for God mode.
Also, the Triad seem to have an admiration for Kim Jong-un, which is quite unhealthy. And is that a dig on Duke Nukem Forever, or what? Rise of the Triad is childish, immature, and over-the-top dumb, which is why it's great. Whatever the game does, it does so with such enthusiasm that you can't help but ride along. Most of the maps in the game play well. They're all designed with fast pace, breakneck pacing in mind, so you'll always be rushing forward, guns blazing, in order to mow down the Triad in half with a machine gun, or to blow all its guts off. You have an assortment of traps always ready to go in order to add some more complications and to spice things up a bit. To me, the best improvement in terms of level design is the missile weapon placement. Whereas you sometimes needed to preserve ammo for particular sections of a level in the original game, it no longer applies here. The game's pretty much all about blowing shit up, and missile weapons are supplied with that goal in mind. This is not a game about strategy. It's all about raw action and how fast you can think and how well you can handle the firefights going on around you. The weakest point of the level design though is the jumping sections. I didn't hate them as much as most other people did, but the way the game physics are handled can make these sections a real pain. Unlike the older Rise of the Triad and older build engine shooters like Duke Nukem 3D, your character is carried through the air by inertia, which means that as you jump, even after letting the forward button go, you'll still go forward. Which, in terms of gameplay, most likely means that you'll jump over a platform and into an instead pit filled with spikes or lava. It definitely takes a while to get used to that, and timing crucial jumps over narrow platforms is a hair-raising challenge. And not always in a good way. There's nothing like failing a jump like this and having to replay the last 2 or 3 minutes just to get to that part again. This brings me to the biggest offender of the game, the checkpoint mode. Rise of the Triad decided to be way old school and makes it so that the game only saves after reaching checkpoints throughout the levels. This is one decision that I found baffling, considering that even the old school shooters allowed you to save anywhere you wanted. Checkpoints also make it so that you restart at a location with the same amount of health that you had upon reaching this point, which can lead you into a situation that is impossible to overcome. How am I supposed to make it through this next section, provided that I'll die to the first enemy that hurts me? At this point, you have to restart the entire level. This also makes it very hard to 100% levels, because the moment you die, you'll have to retrieve all coins you collected and find every secret again. It also doesn't help that the game itself is pretty damn hard, even on the easier difficulty settings. You better get used to that nagging, disembodied voice that is heard whenever you die, because you'll hear it a lot.
Oh, I get it now. So you only think you're John Woo.
The other big offender for the time being is the bugs. As of the time of this video, the game is very buggy and the numerous glitches can be a huge impediment to the playing experience. These bugs can be either minor, like these slight graphical glitches whenever numbers show up as you shoot enemies, or they can be more serious, as you can end up getting stuck in the level geometry and become unable to move out of it unless you blow yourself up with a missile weapon. The flame wall alternate fire is also pretty finicky, as the projectile will sometimes hit enemies without dealing them any damage. The biggest glitch that you had into the game was that whenever you reloaded a checkpoint, your armor will stop existing altogether. But thankfully, this issue just happened to be fixed in a patch, so this is no longer annoying. So thank you very much for fixing this problem right away. The bosses were mostly forgettable in the original game due to them being mainly pushovers, but at least things have been improved in that aspect in the remake. With that said, the bosses still remain one of the game's weaker points because of how some of the bosses can be frustrating to fight, even though they're no longer as bad as in the original game. The first boss probably was the best rounded of the lot. Sebastian Chris has a puzzle going on with him which isn't too hard to solve, but the rest of the fight is kinda tedious because of him having a hit-scan rifle attack which is very damaging. The enemy was the hardest fight in the original game, and is still a hard as hell son of a bitch here with his heat-seeking missiles, and the final fight with El Oscuro is just too much. He has way too many hit points, there's not enough weapons in his lair to fight him, and it takes forever to kill him. At least you can now fight him in his first form, as opposed to letting him kill himself with his own magic. And overall, this remake of Rise of the Triad is a fairly uneven game, but there really is a lot to like. More so if you're a fan of older style shooter like the original game, Duke Nukem 3D, Blood, or Painkiller. The creators of this game clearly understood what made Rise of the Triad great, expanded on it, and cranked the crazy dial all the way to the top. It stays faithful to the original material while making every element of the game much better and more memorable. However, it's clearly not for everyone. The breakneck pacing of the game will throw off people used to modern shooters, there is no regenerating health, and finally the game is tough as nails. Also, the current glitchy state of the game makes the game a chore to play at times. And the reliance of the game on checkpoints does very little to fix this problem, and it can frustrate you to no end to play the same parts over and over again because you keep dying. With that said, I am hopeful for this game because almost every issue I have with it is stuff that can be fixed with patches. Given the low budget nature of the game and its low price, it remains a very good buy as the game turned out really nicely for the most part, and it's a joy to play when everything works. It clearly was a labor of love, and you can tell the developers had a blast making this game. It's a batshit insane shooter which is violent, dumb, immature as all hell, but is clearly aware of it, so it ends up better because of it. Ludicrous jibs, indeed.